It's one of those things, the efficiency, the speed, the resiliency, the security, one or many of those things just resonates with them in a way that, that's all that's important.
This is What the Jam, an interview series where we're finding out what's next for Jamstack. Find out more at thefutureofjamstack.org. All right, today we have Bud Parr joining us. So Bud Parr is the organizer of the New York Jamstack meetup. He's an early pioneer in Jamstack and predates Jamstack, helped create the movement, created a community called The New Dynamic, and has an agency, a digital agency that specializes in Jamstack approaches with the same name, and has just been a pioneer in the Jamstack space for a long time. So very excited to have Bud here with us today. Welcome.
Yeah, this is awesome. Glad to be talking about this stuff again.
All right, let's start off. What does Jamstack mean to you?
What does it mean to me? It means fundamentals. It means at least static first. It means, pre-rendering a site and using only the tools that you need to accomplish the job, as opposed to, some behemoth, tool. It means focusing on content. It means that you've got some files someplace that you can move from here to there and serve on a CDN or wherever you like on a small computer or anything like that. So it really just comes down to the fundamentals to me.
And how did you get into this world? What were you doing before static websites and Jamstack, and what was the push to get you there?
I had been working with a wonderful tool at the time called Expression Engine, which was a PHP, CMS, and that sort of thing. And it was great because it allowed me to do anything I wanted to do in terms of building out a content model and that sort of thing. And that was always important to me. I'd used WordPress and, I'd built hundreds of sites in both of those tools. But I was working on a project for a government entity. I was a consultant for this, not the United States, but another government. And we had to build something that was going to be rock solid, and we were going to replicate our work in various countries. So build kind of the same site over and over and over again. And I got pretty comfortable with them, and I explained to them what this thing was, this Jamstack thing that I had been kind of exploring, here and there for a year. So this is, I think, 2013. And so I explained it to them that, when we needed to replicate this project, that, we could either create another PHP instance and create a whole, very long and involved process, or we could fork it, click a button and start over again. I explained to them the security implications. I explained to them how fast it was. What I didn't explain to them so much was that this was all fairly new technologies. This was right after, right around the time that the Obama campaign had used Jekyll, and they were about that, or at least the team who built it, and the speed gains and that sort of thing. And so I didn't tell them that this was relatively new stuff, and I worked very hard in building out Jekyll when Jekyll was very, very raw, stuff, and still evolving. And but we did it. We built the site, and I've never looked back. I've never built a PHP site since then. And I've got sites that I built then, so that was 2013ish, that are still, still going today. Some of them even, we don't really mess with. We don't change anything. They're just there because there's nothing to go wrong. There's really nothing to hack. And so, it's fantastic.
Yeah. It seems like that Obama campaign use case was really a trigger for a lot of people to realize, oh, this stuff can be used at like a
Yeah.
huge scale,
Yeah.
and it has these advantages of just like stability. I've forgotten how many X million was raised on that website, but
Mhm.
yeah, pretty interesting use case.
Yeah, it was great. And I think the firm that had developed that, there were a few people who were kind of involved in development seed had built that, and they wrote a blog post about, stripping away all the complexity of the monolith and focusing on content. And that really resonated with me.
Mm,
And at the time, because Jekyll was the thing, we were talking about content, and I was realizing how easy it was to say create a content model and try it out,
mm,
see how it worked, and adjust because they don't always work in a spreadsheet or whatever. And then you get into code and all of this stuff, and you realize things need to change. And it was just so agile to go in and make changes because you're dealing with um, front matter. So
mm. Yeah, I mean, compared to your expression engine, which from my that's connected to Code Igniter, right? I
yeah,
think,
right. It was the same team, and it was yeah,
yeah,
right,
that was the first big framework I used as well, Code
right.
Igniter, and I learned a lot from that. But but making database manipulations to change the content model versus changing some front matter, it's just a
Yeah,
different world, right?
right, right.
Hmm. So you build out this government use case, and we're sold on. I guess at that time, what were you calling it? Static.
Yeah, because the new dynamic was originally static as the new dynamic.
Yeah, it's a brilliant
Yeah,
name.
yeah. So, yeah, my company was called something else, and I was talking to a friend of mine about joining forces, and he decided not to do that, but he said, "But the name, you got to keep the name," you know. So, I did, and that's been over or nearly a decade now. So.
Mm. So from those early days, predating Jamstack, what have you seen from pre-Jamstack to Jamstack, coins and growing in popularity to now? What has that journey been like, and what have you seen in terms of the new dynamic community?
Yeah, well, so originally, we were about solving problems, right? There was just how do you do a lot of things with static only, when you don't have a server that you're dealing with, no kind of dynamic activity. So there were a lot of problems to solve. How do you do really basic things like forms and how does search work? Um, you know, that sort of thing. And so a lot of our conversations were about those solved problems. We were also talking about new tools all the time. So it's calmed down now, but at the time there were just a lot of static site generators popping up here and
Mm,
there. A lot of them were very immature, and I think it was kind of a thing. Like people, it was like the to-do list is now, was build a static site generator or something, just like a basic thing who people who are either just nerdy or learning or whatever would want to build one. And some of them were pretty good, and there were really great ideas out there. There was one called Metalsmith that was really
mhm.
cool because it was nothing but one little file, and everything that you needed, you added on. Of course, that ended up being you had added on quite a bit, that sort of thing. And Hugo, of course, came around. Early on. I think that was a pretty early player, and Jekyll, of course, and then just from there. So now the tools have consolidated, the stakes are higher, companies are involved, they're backing the tools to one degree or another, and they solve a lot of more problems and that sort of thing, and they're a lot more sophisticated. So it's evolved quite a bit, and frankly, in a nice way. I mean, a lot of the problems that we had then have been solved.
Mm,
Even problems then that I didn't know that I had, capabilities that I didn't really dream of. that I kind of accepted not having, I can now have. So yeah, so it's evolved in a pretty good way for the most part. With the exception of I personally, and I'm not really against it as a tool, but Next.js I think isn't isn't a great evolution because it's been so dominant, and I think it abstracts a lot of things. For new developers, it makes it very easy for them, but they don't really understand what they're using, and I think it creates kind of a dependency, and it can kind of do everything, and you know, so that's you know, it's not a bad tool. I just think it's probably overused. You
Agreed.
know,
Yeah, like
yeah.
it's a hammer used for all sorts of nails and screws,
Mhm.
and used for sawing through lumber, everything.
Right. Right.
Yeah, and I think it's important to understand where a tool's useful and good, and maybe where another tool's more specialized and better for that use case.
Yeah. And I think from the very beginning, to my mind, the idea behind Jamstack was choose the tool, choose only the tools that you need,
Mm.
and so, yeah, so we kind of got away from that. And, I think that's probably.
Mm. So let's get into that one a little bit. So the like core things that brought you into this world. One, I hear like being able to choose the tools and that simplicity of that as well, where you can choose
Mhm.
specialized tools and have control over them as well. What were other factors or other benefits of like Jamstack?
Yeah.
Do you see?
Well, I mean, always, of course, with the performance, I mean, I come from when if you wanted to put a site up, you would put it on a server someplace, and sometimes those were servers that we got from some company, and sometimes those were servers that I was doing all the internals and that sort of thing. It was really kind of unfun, particularly when you had problems with them, and it's a production site and you've got problems, and then how do you do things, redundancies, and all of these difficulties, so the idea of just having a folder of HTML files and being able to kind of give them away,
Yeah.
put them on a server someplace, put them up on particularly on a CDN, was fantastic. And but the performance benefits of that, not having to, you know, go to the server and that sort of thing, not having to the logic of going up and seeing what's in a database. And this was how I always explained to clients, kind of the key difference is that, the database was completely separate from that front end site. And
Hmm.
so I would explain to them, say their WordPress site or their Drupal site or whatever, that whenever somebody goes to the visit the site, that there was some logic going on to say, go into the database, look at what's supposed to be on this site, and figure that out and send it over the wire. And that takes time, even if it's measured in milliseconds. It takes time, and it certainly gets in the way of all the other things that you have to load, your images and videos or whatever that you're loading on the site. And so the performance issues, to my mind, were then and are now, paramount. They're
Mm.
really, they don't solve all your performance issues. You still have to make good decisions, but it gives you that base layer that you're in much better shape. Also, security.
Hmm.
We're working on a very highly secure site right now, and the client's parent organization wanted to use WordPress and that sort of thing. And it was just a really easy argument to explain to them, how keeping that database completely separate really gave us a good, again, just like with the performance, a really good baseline for, our security, dealing with our security concerns.
Mm.
So those are really the two big things that have always been important for me.
So dealing with clients, how do they how do you explain Jamstack to them, and what level of understanding do they have of it?
Um, Most of my clients either come to me from a place of I want this Jamstack thing, right? Or, one of the things that we've had in the past were, say a company just getting their relationship with a VC firm, right? And the VC says, ditch your website, you need this Jamstack thing. And then they
Mm,
would come to us. So that was one group, the people who already even if they weren't technical, they were either told or they knew that they have it. We've always had, say startups that are engineering led and they come to us, because they get it, right? And so those are pretty easy. They usually have a tool in mind or something like that, things in mind already. Um, but and then the other side of that are the people who are non-technical. They're in marketing and they have a job to get done, and they mostly just defer to us. A lot of them say want WordPress because WordPress is what it is.
mm,
We recently lost a longtime client because somebody new came to the firm and said, "We want WordPress. We must
yep.
have WordPress." And so, beyond all logic, they made that move. And the day that they did, because we have them on all these alerts, their performance just dropped dramatically because now they have not only are they on WordPress in general, but now they have all these plugins with conflicting scripts and all of these things that they just have no idea, and they're like, why is the performance so bad? um so but a lot of those people defer to us. I do explain to them how it works, and I usually start a little bit with, what I was saying just a little bit before about, when somebody comes to the website, that there's this logic that has to happen to figure out what goes on that site. And then I explain to them, all the implications of that, not just performance, but security and that sort of thing. And how it works with us, because, one of the things that I don't think is truly appreciated with Jamstack is how easy it is for us to create a new version. For us, it's just another branch,
Yeah.
and we will create whatever feature the client needs and throw that up on a server, as a deploy preview now, of course, and have this whole version that then is basically destroyed as soon as we merge it and don't need it anymore. So I explained these things for them and how quickly we can move. It's also reflected in our pricing. So we've been working for years on a subscription level pricing, and very often that pricing is very low compared to what they would see for another firm, and it's just because we can be so efficient with
Mm,
our tool and our ability to just create a branch, put a deployed preview, merge the branch, and that sort of thing. That workflow is just amazingly efficient. So
mm,
that's a really big, important day to day type of thing that I don't think people, really appreciate when they're getting into, say, or when they're in a server world
mm.
where you have to have staging servers and all of these things, so.
Yeah. No, it's a great point. What do you call it with clients these days? Do you call it a static website? Do you call it Jamstack? Yeah, where do you sit
Yeah,
there?
I mean, I don't really call it anything, and I've
Mm,
struggled with that. I mean, I see Jamstack as an industry word,
mm,
and I do use that word. I guess I do, thinking about it, but not heavily. I don't label us as a Jamstack firm or anything like that. Although I think we're going to build a new website for ourselves for 2024, and I think we're going to kind of push on those technologies a little bit more,
yeah.
because they're ever more relevant. Um, but I think that yeah, it's really just about, this is how we work and it's great for you. And oh, by the way, and one other thing that I talked to them about and I've really highlighted recently is we had a client who came to us a few years ago. They were in WordPress. They had a blog post that they published, and it had happened to be related to a really big event in America. And their site went down. and they spent 4 days trying to get the site back up, and it was slow, and it cost them a ton of money. And it's kind of funny. So then after that, they moved into Jamstack. They've been with us ever since, but the personnel have changed. So that guy who did
Mm.
all some years ago um, is gone, and so new people are around, and they're asking me, "Oh, well, we have this big event. We're going to make a blog post, and we're really concerned about a lot of traffic and that sort of thing." And I'm just kind of laughing as I'm like, "You're our case study."
Yeah.
So yeah, so those are all just points that I don't think for the client, um, you know, yeah, anything else matters, and a name doesn't matter. It's one of those things: the efficiency, the speed, the resiliency, the security. One or many of those things just resonates with them in a way that that's all that's important.
Mm. Yeah, I feel like everyone who's come into the Jamstack community has a story like that, and it's usually WordPress. Like something
Yeah, yeah,
bad happened, they look for alternatives. Jamstack or like static site generators are like the antithesis of or solve all the problems that they encountered,
right.
and they're converted because they've felt that pain. And
Yeah,
I think that's what can be a struggle with non-technical people is you, you haven't felt that pain. Maybe you're on a fast internet connection and you're like, well, the website loads fast for me.
mhm.
And
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
getting into all of those intricacies that can be
Yep.
difficult. Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing that I don't think's talked about enough with this approach to building websites, and I know you've been a big proponent of, is the environmental impact. Do you want
Yeah.
to talk a little bit about that and how you see static sites in like an environmental, but yeah, as a technology that can help with climate change and
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I did a talk. We haven't been too active since the pandemic in our meetups. Part of that is just what's been going on, in the general Jamstack world, and part of it is just like, you know, a lot of stuff moved online, and I didn't really care for doing the online stuff. And then the difficulty of getting real estate, like space in New
yeah,
York City after the pandemic is gone, because a lot of like we had companies that were that we use their space, and like, we're a distributor now. We don't have the space.
mm,
So anyway, I did a talk, though, I guess last year, um, about, the carbon impact of your website. And, I didn't really focus on Jamstack that much, because it is like performance, an issue where, um, you know, Jamstack gives you this really good baseline to go from, but the rest is up to you. And a good performing website isn't necessarily a carbon friendly website.
mm,
They're two slightly different things. So it requires a degree of thoughtfulness and that sort of thing. But I do think, like, we watch all of the, where people are going with their, data centers and that sort of thing. So I do think that a CDN, it's really, the math on this is really hard to do. It's
yeah,
just, and it's very inexact. Um, but I've kind of coming down on, from everything that I've read and seen, that using a content delivery network, particularly if that content delivery network is moving towards using green, like we use several providers, but one of them is Cloudflare. And they've been really pushing on making their data centers more green. I think Google does the same, and
mm-hmm,
then some of the firms, I think, some of the firms that we know are use, they're kind of a, what do you call it, like they use multiple providers, themselves. Um, so I think that that's very important. Obviously, the efficiency of the website is very important for, being carbon friendly. We've tried to improve our behavior, not doing builds all the time. So, there's all of these things that are, that you can't take for granted, just because you're in a Jamstack site. But I do think it gives you a really good baseline from which to be more efficient and to be more thoughtful about what you're doing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think th- I, as you say, it's hard to calculate, but I feel like as a community, we should try and figure out these questions because there's kind of two halves of it, right? One is the data transfer when someone
Mm-hmm.
requests the website, and the other is serving the files.
Mm-hmm.
And in a dynamic world, that's building the entire page and sending it to the user. In the
Mm-hmm.
static world, that's the build step, as you mentioned, and then I guess the server that's serving those static files.
Mm-hmm.
And you would think, let's say you have a website that gets 10 million hits a month. Um, the number of servers that would be required for a static website, which, a pretty low end server can do thousands of requests a second, just serving
Mm-hmm.
files, trying to do that same output with a dynamic website that's hitting a database.
Mm-hmm.
You would think that the infrastructure is just expanded so much on the dynamic side. And if it's essentially a static website anyway, um, there's almost like an ethical question of
Mm-hmm.
why are you using dynamic for this, putting beyond all the other benefits of a static website. But
Yeah.
I don't really hear a lot of people talking about that, and it was cool to see. Um,
Yeah. I've also seen a study that said that PHP is the least efficient programming language. So the vast majority of your dynamic sites are, running PHP.
mm,
So.
yeah, no, really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So where do you see the the limits of Jamstack? Like what um over the past 5 years we've seen the Jamstack definition be expanded out. Where do you
Mm-hmm.
see that line of okay, this is definitely not Jamstack anymore?
Well, yeah, I mean, because this comes into question. I think, as a matter of fact, when I think Web Archive, they put out that big report, and every year, the state of the web type of thing. I'm forgetting the name of it, but the first year that they did it, I think that it was the first year, or if not that, the second. But they did their Jamstack, the state of Jamstack type of thing,
Mm,
and they included Next.js in there. So that's a little bit controversial for me, but because I think Next.js was more towards the server. So to me, Jamstack is just firmly, and I know people have talked about this, and I don't care, to be honest, that much. Jamstack to me is pre-rendering, at least the vast majority of your site. I think that it's wonderful now that we have these tools that we can kind of on the fly choose, if we need server rendering pages and that sort of thing. That's a huge help. But the fact is that at least the work that I do, a vast majority of those pages do not need server rendering.
mm,
So pre-rendering is really, to my mind, that cutoff,
mm. Yeah,
independent of tool or something like that. I think that gets to be a little bit of a red herring, but
yeah. No, I agree. I think by saying that it's not saying that pre-rendering is the solution to everything, and it's saying if you can pre-render it. Otherwise,
yeah,
there are these other awesome tools that can do the rest of it, and
right.
it's a combination of being deliberate in your
Yeah.
approach and having the having the conversation about should this be pre-rendered or should this be dynamically
Mhm.
rendered. I feel like
Mhm.
that a lot of that gets lost in today's world.
Right, right. And I really have a lot of respect for, any team that says, here's the job at hand, this is what we have to do, this is the set of tools. And inversely, we do that similarly. I mean, our business model depends on a lot of efficiency, and so we do want to use, a small set of tools, right, so that we know them
Yeah.
very well. So But the inverse is that of that is we don't take work that doesn't fit into our world. So we're choosing the tool for the job. It's just that, we're only taking the jobs that fit with tools that we use. And I think that's been really hard. I mean, we've lost good clients for that. Just like I said, just with these people who, were poached away by WordPress and that sort of thing. But and others, and so I think that's a line to be drawn that for us is very important.
Yeah. What do you think needs to happen to the Jamstack community for it to thrive into the future?
Yeah, well, I like some of the things that you've told me in terms of it being more community led. And no offense against Netlify, I think that they've done wonderful things for the space, really have. But I do think that when they created the Jamstack website and the logo and that sort of thing, it was very clear that it was about them and their business needs more than the needs of the community. Fine, I don't begrudge them for that, but I do think that that a community of people solving problems and sharing ideas, supporting, good tool sets, helping one another with, how do you show a client this sort of thing? I think is really important. Even now, when the problems are different, the tools are more mature, and that sort of thing. And I do think that community can also exert influence on the people who are making tools to make sure that they don't get too far away from the fundamentals. Yeah, I think that's really important.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. But this is a great conversation. Thank you so much for joining today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Always fun.
That's it for today's interview. Find out more at thefutureofjamstack.org.